So my question for you is what is it that knows the experiences that you're having? What is it that knows that you feel fill in the blank right now? What is it that knows something very basic about this moment? What is it that knows that you are listening? What is it that knows that you are a living expression right now, that you exist? Now, such a question, it's really meant to kind of stop the mind that tries to know in thought and conclusion. It's really meant to quiet that part of yourself and bring you back to something very essential. Like, what is it that knows that you're breathing, or that the lights are on in the room or not on in the room? It's this very basic knowing that seems inherent within the intelligence of existence. Where do you think that knowing arises from? Does it arise from your personality? Does it arise from thinking and concluding? I guess not. I bet not. There's a kind of knowing that's even prior to conclusions of mind. Like, you just kind of know that your body's, let's say, warm or cold without having to refer to any sort of conclusion in thought. You just know that. Or you know when you're breathing freely or not so freely. You know when the lights are on or when they're not. And yes, there's an engaging of the senses and the intelligence of the whole body-mind mechanism. But this is a kind of knowingness of being that doesn't have to build a case for anything. It's like very quick. And so, what is that knowing? What is that knowingness? And how is it different than a knowingness that, I know the answer, that registers in thought? It usually registers more like below the neck, lower down in the body, maybe even in your core. Just some sense of, I just know that the lights are on. I just know that, for example, I'm warm or I'm cool. Now, this kind of knowing, it's not flashy. It's not a kind of epiphany type of knowing. It's something that's ongoing throughout the day that goes unnoticed. But if you take the time to turn toward it and pay attention, there's just like a very essential knowing. And it's a knowing that's very similar to being aware of. But it doesn't necessarily need eyes to see. Sometimes we may think of awareness. There's lots of different ways to think of awareness. There's a kind of awareness of our directed attention where we see something and we observe it and we become aware of what we see. Or maybe another sense kicks in, like we hear something and we become aware of that sound. We feel a certain temperature, a certain texture, something through the sense of touch or or having a physical body that just generally feels, and we know through that sense. Now this kind of intelligence that animates our senses is the same intelligence that informs our awareness and its content of what we are aware of. And it also informs a kind of knowingness of being, a knowingness that might say, I exist. It might even say, I don't exist. But there's some sense of fundamental knowingness that's really one of the most essential expressions of who we are. It might be the most essential expression of who we are. And so when we get caught in our mind that wants to seek for a certain experience, that we want to know as an experience we can grasp, we negate the operative functioning of a knowingness of being that's much more subtle and quiet. And it's when we allow our person and encourage our person to become more and more subtly attuned to a knowingness that's essential in our being, that has always been. It can't be given. It can't be taken away. But it can become more conscious. And this is something that if we attune to a kind of knowing, perhaps through asking a question, like what knows that it's this temperature or this degree of light in the room? When we ask a question like that, it's meant to stop the thinking mind and its realm of knowing. It's meant to deliver us into a more essential orientation where the energies that go out into tracking and managing experience get quieter and become more withdrawn and more settled, in order to just lean into our experience like you're going to lean in and listen to a pin drop. And so some people become disinterested in what I'm saying because they're looking for something flashy and something maybe more immediate, in terms of something that's almost like taking a pill that gives a cure. But in spiritual practice, there's this way that we can really give ourselves to orienting gradually more and more and more and more to this essential knowing. And the more that the energies that were out into other realms of seeking and knowing become more oriented toward this subtle knowingness of being, which isn't always so subtle, but initially it can seem very subtle. The more we withdraw the focus of our seeking and striving to know in more gross experience or in thought, and attune to this essential knowing, the more the energies get transferred into that essential knowing and brighten it, and it comes more alive. And there's this knowingness of being that begins to thrive and come alive more and more. And there can be more of a zeal for what it is to be, and to wake up in the morning and engage and have that sense of zeal of what it knows to be, really have an appetite of what it is to be, and hold forth and pour out into activity and into engagement and love of life.